Think about how many times you've looked at that friend and wondered, does he have feelings for me? Imagine discovering that behind every gesture, every look, there was a hidden feeling, an unspoken desire for something deeper than friendship. In this video, we'll reveal the 10 subtle signs. He wants to be more than just your friend. And the 10th sign is the most powerful of all. The kind of sign that, once revealed, changes everything. But before we begin, if this topic has already piqued your curiosity, if you want to understand what really goes on in the male mind from a critical and revealing perspective, subscribe now to the Female Red Pill channel, like it, comment if you've ever suspected that a friend had other intentions, and share this video with your friends. I promise you that by the end, surprising revelations will be made, and you'll never see male friendships the same way again. We're going to dive deep into the critical analysis, using the red pill lens, not in the shallow and repetitive way that you see out there, but based on serious authors, relevant works, and a deep emotional and psychological understanding. After all, behind friendship, there is often a powerful and silent intention hidden. Sign number 1. He always shows up when you need him most. It doesn't matter if it's the middle of the night, if he's busy, or if he has something important the next day. He finds a way to be there. But is this just friendship? According to Rollo Tomassi, in The Rational Male, Chapter 4, pages 65 to 69, men driven by repressed desire often use emotional closeness as a way to stay relevant until the perfect opportunity arises. This constant presence is often mistaken for selfless generosity, but what lies behind it is the hidden hope of being noticed as more than a friend. Have you ever felt like he shows up just when you're vulnerable? Coincidence? Maybe not. Sign number 2. He gets discreetly uncomfortable when you talk about other men. He may smile, joke, even give you dating advice, but watch his eyes, his body language, his tone of voice, small micro-expressions of tension, irony, or discomfort. David Buss in The Evolution of Desire, Chapter 10, pages 211 to 215, points out that men tend to show signs of emotional territorialism even in platonically defined relationships, when they want something more. In other words, he may even pretend that everything is fine, but his body gives it away. Sign number 3. He compliments details that others don't notice. It's not just compliments about your clothes or appearance. He notices the way you speak, how you gesture, how your gaze changes when you're sad or happy. These compliments reveal a deep observation, which goes beyond the casual. It's as if he's studying you. And here, an essential concept of the critical red pill comes into play: selective idealization. As Suzanne Venker explains in the book, The Alpha Female's Guide to Men and Marriage, Chapter 6, pages 143 to 148, men who desire a woman tend to create an emotional ideal based on the smallest details observed in silence. Sign number 4. He seeks subtle but frequent physical contact. A touch on the shoulder, a touch on the hand, a hug that lasts a second too long, an excuse to fix a stray hair. Body language speaks volumes when words fail to speak. These gestures are especially revealing when they are repetitive, but never go beyond the bounds of respect, as if he were testing your receptiveness. This subtlety is a strong indication of romantic interest, as Esther Perel points out in Mating in Captivity, Chapter 3, pages 59 to 63. Contained sexual tension manifests itself in carefully measured micro-touches. Sign number 5. He shares intimate details about his emotional life. We're not talking about trivial outbursts. We're talking about childhood stories, traumas, insecurities, secret plans. He exposes what few people know. Why? Because he wants to create an emotional bond with you. This is one of the most powerful connection strategies, used unconsciously by emotionally interested men, as described by Robert Glover in No More Mr. Nice Guy, Chapter 8, pages 137-141. Men who live in the friend zone often try to compensate for the lack of physical intimacy with emotional depth, in the hope that this will make them indispensable. Now stop and think. How many of these signs have you noticed in a friend? How many times have you ignored small gestures, thinking they were just being nice? And if you look again, with your eyes open, does everything change? If you've watched this far, tell me in the comments. Now it all makes sense. And if you're starting to wonder what's really behind certain friendships, then get ready. Because the next sign reveals an even deeper psychological pattern. Have you ever noticed that he adopts your expressions, your gestures, or even your opinions over time? This is not just coincidence. According to Dr. John Gray, in Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, Chapter 7, pages 142 to 147, mirroring is one of the subconscious ways a man tries to establish rapport and alignment with the woman he desires. Even if he hasn't fully admitted those desires to himself, he starts to talk like you, laugh at what you laugh at, and subtly match your mood. This isn't manipulation. It's the unconscious longing to be in sync with you, to belong in your world. Sign number 7. He includes you in his long-term plans. Pay attention to this one. It's not about inviting you to a party next week. It's when he says things like, "When I get that new job, we should travel together," or, "You'll come to my wedding one day, unless I marry someone like you." These statements seem playful, but they plant seeds. They create a future frame, where you're already part of his journey. In The Unplugged Alpha by Richard Cooper, Chapter 5, pages 98 to 102, the author explains how men who want more than friendship will subconsciously test future compatibility by weaving the woman into hypothetical future scenarios. These aren't just jokes, they're coded invitations. Have you ever heard him do this? If yes, what was your reaction? Sign number 8. He notices and reacts when other men give you attention. It might come off as a joke or a sarcastic comment. Something like, "Oh, so that guy was flirting with you, huh?" Or he might get strangely quiet when another man compliments you in front of him. This subtle shift reveals emotional territory. As Dr. David Deida explains in The Way of the Superior Man, Chapter 12, pages 63 to 67, men can suppress desire, but not the possessiveness that often comes with it. Even in the absence of a romantic relationship, the urge to defend territory emerges when interest is real. He may never say it out loud, but his reaction when you talk about other guys might speak volumes. Sign number 9. He supports you in ways that go beyond friendship. We all expect friends to help us, but when a man goes out of his way, consistently, sacrificially, and silently, it's time to pause. Whether it's helping you move, driving you long distances, or fixing things without being asked, his actions are doing the talking. As Tomassi writes in The Rational Male, Chapter 9, pages 173 to 177, one of the most overlooked signs of latent romantic interest is covert contract behavior, where a man gives excessively in hopes of being eventually rewarded with romantic attention. He doesn't say, "I'm doing this for you because I want more," but his behavior speaks clearly, and if that recognition never comes, it quietly breaks him. Now, before we move on to the final and most important sign, I want to ask you something. Why do you think so many women overlook these signs? Is it because they truly don't see them? Or because seeing them would mean confronting something deeper, something that could change everything about the friendship? This is the power of red pill critical analysis. It challenges us to see beyond the surface, to recognize the unspoken, the hidden, the truths that society politely asks us to ignore. Because the truth is, many male-female friendships operate on a delicate tension, and once you awaken to that dynamic, you can never go back to seeing it as just friendship. Let me know in the comments, which sign hit you the hardest so far, and if this is making you rethink some of your friendship, you're not alone. Thousands of women around the world are waking up to this exact reality and finding clarity where there was once confusion. But stay with me, because we are about to enter the final stage of this exploration. The last sign, sign number 10, is the most revealing, the most emotional, and the most undeniable of them all. When you recognize this one, the mask falls. We've explored 9 signs so far, each peeling back another layer of male psychology. But now, we arrive at the 10th sign, the one that cannot be faked, hidden, or rationalized away. This is not something he says out loud. This is not something you'll find in a text message or a conversation. This is something you feel, in the way he lingers after goodbyes, in the way he pauses before speaking when you're upset, in the quiet moments when he says nothing, but everything in his presence is screaming, "Please see me." Rollo Tomassi calls this the beta orbit, the state where a man places himself in emotional limbo, circling around a woman he desires, hoping for a shift. The Rational Male, Chapter 10, pages 183 to 189, explores how men in this position suppress their masculine desire to assert and instead choose to wait patiently for a sign, a moment when she'll finally look at him and see him as more than a friend. And this waiting can last for years. It's in this silent suffering that we see one of the most powerful and tragic truths about human desire, that sometimes love doesn't scream, it waits. Have you ever felt that presence? That one friend who never oversteps, never confesses, but is always there. Too much to be just a friend, yet never enough to be more. Now you know what that really was. And here's where we pull back the curtain entirely, because now we go deeper. This isn't just about him. It's about you and the choices you've been taught to make. Society constantly tells women to keep the nice guy around, to value his loyalty, his kindness, his patience. But it never tells you the full cost of that patience for him. Because every time you called him to vent about another man, every time you leaned on him but looked past him, every time you said, "I don't want to ruin our friendship," you were, knowingly or not, asking him to bury his desire. Red pill analysis dares to expose this hidden contract, and the red pill critique challenges the idea that this dynamic is harmless or noble. Authors like Paul Elam and Warren Farrell argue that men are conditioned to accept emotional martyrdom in exchange for the hope of intimacy, a transaction where the currency is their silence, and the reward might never come. Warren Farrell, in The Myth of Male Power, Chapter 13, pages 245 to 250, describes how men are trained to serve and suppress, and how women are rarely taught to recognize this silent offering for what it is, a deferred declaration of love. Now ask yourself, how many men are just friends with you, but suffering quietly? How many times have you sensed something more, but looked away? This is not about guilt. It's about awareness. Because when we bring light to the silent corners of our relationships, we gain the power to choose consciously, not reactively, to define connections with clarity, not confusion, to honor truth, even when it's uncomfortable. And here's the most powerful realization of all. Sometimes the man who waits isn't weak. He's strong enough to stay, not because he has no options, but because he believes you are worth the wait. But the question that remains, the one only you can answer, is this: are you willing to finally see him? Let us know in the comments. Have you ever realized too late that a friend was in love with you? Or are you realizing it now? And if this message is speaking to your heart, if you're seeing friendships through a completely new lens, don't stop here, because we're about to go even deeper. In the final part of this video, we'll explore what you can actually do with this information. We'll examine how to respond when you recognize the signs, how to honor the man's truth without breaking him, and how to make decisions that reflect emotional maturity, not just social norms. It's time to move beyond the signs and into action. This is where we often get stuck, because we've been taught to believe that as long as nothing explicit is said, the friendship is safe, that intentions don't matter unless they're declared. But here's the red pill critical truth. Intention shapes energy, and when a man silently desires you, everything about the relationship is already altered, whether you name it or not. Dr. Helen Smith in Men on Strike, Chapter 9, pages 198 to 203, describes how men are withdrawing emotionally from modern relationships, not because they feel less, but because they're exhausted from feeling without being acknowledged. They're tired of sitting in the friend zone, holding space, hoping, waiting, only to be forgotten the moment a more assertive man appears. This isn't just about heartbreak. It's about emotional erosion. So now let's talk about what you can do, not just for him but for you. First, acknowledge the reality. With honesty and compassion, you don't need to confront him with a dramatic speech. You don't need to cut him off or pretend nothing's happening. But you do need to stop pretending the energy hasn't shifted. Pretending keeps both of you trapped in limbo. Maturity begins with recognition. Ask yourself, do I enjoy the comfort of his attention without ever intending to reciprocate? Do I lean on his emotional support while knowing I will never love him romantically? These are hard questions, but they lead to clarity, not cruelty. Second, decide with integrity. You now stand at a crossroad. You can either choose to bring the relationship into alignment with truth, or you can continue the silent contract that keeps him hoping and you half present. If you don't see him that way, it's okay. But then honor that with emotional boundaries. Limit the behaviors that create mixed signals. Because if you keep calling him late at night to talk about other guys, if you keep inviting him into intimate emotional spaces without ever acknowledging his silent love, then you are participating in his emotional confusion, whether you admit it or not. Dr. Robert Glover, in No More Mr. Nice Guy, Chapter 11, pages 167 to 172 makes it clear. Women often unconsciously reward men for staying quiet, while punishing them emotionally when they finally speak. Don't be that woman. If he speaks, honor his courage. If he stays silent, see his silence for what it is, a choice that costs him more than you know. Third, if you feel something too, own it. Now, maybe you've pushed those feelings away. Maybe you were afraid of losing the friendship. But what if the friendship was never neutral to begin with? What if that deep connection, that loyalty, that shared vulnerability was already love, in its earliest form? One of the most powerful transformations comes when a woman finally sees a man clearly, not as a placeholder, not as a backup, but as a man worth choosing. Authors like Suzanne Venker and Alison Armstrong argue that women often overlook emotionally invested men because they don't trigger chaos or drama. But isn't it time to question the belief that passion must come with pain? Is it possible that love, real love, has been quietly waiting in the friend zone all along? This is your moment. Not to play with his heart, not to string him along, but to respond with truth, either by blessing him with freedom or by finally saying the words he's never dared to ask for. I see you too. And if you're watching this thinking, this makes me realize how many good men I've overlooked, then let this be your wake-up call. Because relationships built on truth and emotional maturity are rare and worth protecting. Maybe he's not the one. Maybe he is. But either way, you now hold the power to choose something better than ambiguity. Let's stop telling men to wait silently. Let's stop rewarding quiet suffering and start cultivating authentic connection. The kind where no one hides their heart just to stay close. If you've watched this far, comment below. I choose clarity over comfort. Let's see how many women are ready to rise above the noise and build connections based on truth, not confusion. And remember, this is only the beginning. There are layers to the red pill critical perspective that go far beyond friendships. On screen now, you'll see 2 more videos. One dives deep into why men withdraw emotionally, and the other reveals the hidden dynamics behind situationships. Watch them next, and uncover the truths no one else is brave enough to say. And of course, subscribe to Female Red Pill like this video, share it with someone who needs this truth, and drop a comment if this changed your view on male-female friendships. Because when you choose to see what's been there all along, that's when real transformation begins.